Jim is the director of our sport and entertainment management program here at Cleveland State. Before Cleveland State, Jim served as the director of the Center for Sports Administration at Ohio University and developed the successful MBA in sports business and other programs at Arizona State University. We very much appreciate Jim serving as moderator, and I will now turn it over to him to introduce our distinguished speaker.
Thanks, Heidi, and welcome to what I hope is going to be a great and final Cornerstone webinar to end the year out in the series. It's my pleasure today to welcome a very special guest and friend in Kevin Clayton, who's the Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, Engagement with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And it's kind of neat for me because I am a Cleveland Cavaliers alumni and used to be their senior VP of sales and marketing. But Kevin and I go back some time, but he is really a thought leader and advocate for diversity and inclusion, and brings just a wealth of experience to the table for us today. And throughout his career, he has worked to create inclusive environments and opportunities for underrepresented communities, not only in the sports industry, but all industries. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on his background, but I just want to welcome Kevin to the podcast, and we'll get it going. Welcome, Kevin.
Hey, Jim, thank you. And I also would like to welcome our participants and prepare them for a fun next 55 minutes with us.
Yeah, and Kevin, let me just let our participants know that the way we've set up this session is pretty much Kevin going for 35, 40 minutes. I've got some questions, but we will also open the Q&A up. So if you have any questions as he is going through his presentation, you want to get them into the Q&A early, feel free to hit that button down at the bottom of your screen. So Kevin, the show is yours.
Okay. Hey, thanks again, Jim. And to the participants, I'm going to ask you to be as participatory as you can by asking any questions, and feel free to put the questions in the Q&A at any point in time. When I'm kind of done going through my piece, we will get right to it. So with that, I'm going to take a moment to share my screen, and I do want to give you a heads up that at some point there's a video I'm going to show. It's going to take me to YouTube. I'm going to have to come quickly out of the presentation to get to that, but it's just going to be a moment of seconds. So Jim, I'm going to share my screen, and if you can just give me just a audible yes when you see I'm in full screen here.
Your slides are up. You're in full screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yep. So the title of what I want to talk about to the references that were made is around diversity, inclusion, and equity as a strategy. And that might be foreign to some, because oftentimes you think about DEI is just kind of like the right thing to do, and it's around having 8 seats around the table, and we're going to get 8 people that look different, and therefore we have DE&I. That's not what this is about. The first slide that you see here, "For the Love for the Land," is the Cleveland Cavaliers mantra. It is what we stand on as we think about our social impact and community impact strategy. For the love is for humanity. For the land is for Cleveland. I'm going to talk about the evolution of this, but I wanted to start there because this is the ending point. And if I can take a phrase out of Stephen Covey's teaching, you always start with the end in mind. So this is where we're going to end up. Let me share with you how we got there. Now, for those of you who are not sports fans, I apologize for being a little bit corny right now because I'm coming off of the heels of last night, our season ending. So I'm still in this kind of basketball mode. So I'm going to talk to you about this work from a first quarter standpoint. And I just want us to be clear, what game are we really playing? When we say DE&I, what are we really talking about? Second quarter, why should you care about DE&I? The fact that you're on this call would suggest that there's some interest that you have, but we're going to really drill down as to why you should care regardless if you come from an academic background, if you're a student, if you're a business person, or you just happen to log in because you were interested. We're going to talk about the why. We also want to use an example. I want to share with you what the Cavs game plan is. And as you could probably imagine, game plan for us would be strategy in the corporate world. Also, as I said, we'll wrap up with For the Love for the Land. And just in case we have time, I'm prepared for us to go into overtime because I want to be really clear around the whole concept of all lives matter, Black lives matter. And I have a visual that I think will kind of help frame all of this together. So with that being said, just want to share with you just a little bit of history from my perspective. I joined the Cavs. Actually, this is my 4th season that I'm concluding. I started in April of 2019. And the reason I'm showing this is because I want to give a reference point to, in the sports world, how new this work is. So when I joined, and I was the 4th C-suite level leader amongst all professional sports teams. If you take the 5 major sports leagues, if you take football, basketball, hockey, soccer, baseball, take those professional sports leagues, I was the 4th one to hold a position at a C-suite level with dedicated resources. For comparison purposes, if you were to look at the Fortune 500 companies 4 years ago, 90% of those companies had a department, a level with this kind of seniority and resources that I created when I came here. Now, the reason why that's important is because in sports, the perception is that, wow, you all don't need to worry about diversity. Look at the players, look at who's on the field, look who's on the court. However, if you peel back behind the scenes and take a look at the business of professional sports, and professional sports is a huge business, our boardrooms, our senior levels, our management levels look very similar to Fortune 500 companies, but we always looked at, okay, who's on the court and who's on the field. So this is a huge need in the sports world. So I talked about how do we connect with what game are we playing? Oftentimes when I do these conversations, the first question that I want to ask is around how do you define certain terms so that we can have common language. You know, if I mention diversity and I'm thinking about diversity or define diversity one way, and I ask Jim, how does he define diversity? And it's totally different, then we aren't even speaking the same language. And there is a language of diversity. There is a language of inclusion, and there's one of equity. And I want to just take a moment to share with you, when I use these terms, what they mean. I'm not suggesting that you change your definition. I am suggesting that perhaps you give my definition or our definition just a little bit of consideration as you're thinking about the work that you do or the interest that you have in this. So when we first asked the question around what is diversity, if we were in a room right now and this was a in-person session, I would ask the 35 of you to write down your definition of diversity, give it to me, and then I would compare those. Given I don't have that opportunity to do that, I'm going to share with you what I think most of you would talk about. Most people, when I ask them, or when we talk about diversity, they talk about qualities of people, which are called dimensions of diversity. And it's really around looking at race and gender and experiences, religion, ethnicity, all these different things. That is in the majority of definitions that people have for diversity. They list characteristics of people. And if you think about it from just that perspective, that's fine, but that really isn't what this work is about. All that is listing characteristics of people. And that typically is embedded in your HR departments when you talk about who the representation is of the population groups that serve our organizations. I'll offer you our definition. Diversity for us is a collective mixture of our fans, team members, properties, teams, and partners characterized by our differences and our similarities. Here's the point. There's probably some words in there that you wouldn't think would be in a definition. Let me tell you why our definition feels as bland as it does, and it feels as all-encompassing as it does. First, we don't list characteristics of people, because when you do that, you're going to leave somebody out. I cannot possibly list every characteristic of everybody. Also, the last sentence, we talk about differences as well as our similarities. I've had people in these sessions say, wait a minute, Kevin, I mean, you asked us about diversity. You didn't ask us what we had that was similar. Well, if you think about that, how could I have a conversation with anybody about this subject matter if I don't take into consideration those things that connect us, that we have in common, and those differences? The reason why we do that and we list it is because if you only focus on those differences, you're going to create a tension. And just think about yourself. The 37 of you who are on this call, if you walked into a room and everybody in that room was completely different from you, how uncomfortable that would feel. However, what we typically do when that happens is we talk to people and we seek out similarities, and we do that because it builds comfort. Comfort then builds trust, and then trust allows you to be productive. So the listing here is everybody in our sphere of influence, our fans, our team members, our different properties, characterized by our differences as well as our similarities. Now we move on to the conversation about what is inclusion. So inclusion is actually doing something. Inclusion means that we're going to create and foster a trusting environment in which all are included, respected, and supported to be engaged in the acceleration of our big rocks. Our big rocks are our 4 key strategies that we have as an organization. Inclusion is, and that means you're going to do something. You're not just going to assume that, oh, it's going to happen on its own. And here's a point that I'd like to make to sum this up. You can have diversity and not have inclusion. You can have diversity and not have inclusion. And what that means is, honestly, you don't have to do anything to have diversity. I cannot see any of the 37 participants on this call, and I know I have diversity. And the reason why we have diversity is because we're all not cut out of the same cloth. Now, do we have different dimensions of diversity? Do we have all the dimensions that we may need to achieve our business objectives? I don't know that, but we have diversity. The point, though, is that does not mean you have inclusion. You have to do something. So then we move into a term that within the last probably 6 to 8 years has become very popular in our industry, and that is what is equity. When we think about equity, we think about level setting the organizational landscape where all are empowered to be their authentic selves and contribute. And what that says is that we're going to create an environment, a culture where we've level set the culture where everybody can bring their uniqueness to the organization, whatever that might be. I've been in organizations before where we have identified kind of the actual characteristics of people that we want to bring in from a skill set and competency standpoint. And then when we talk about diversity, it's like, yes, we want that person to bring all that they are. And as soon as they come into the organization, we then try to have them assimilate into some sort of corporate culture that strips individuals of all those things, and we ask them for it in the interview process. So no, that's not equity. Equity says, I'm going to accept you as you are. You're going to have a chance to come in. The playing field will be level. You can stand on your own 2 feet and contribute. I like visual types of communication because it just helps me in my thinking. I'm going to show you a slide that many of you have seen before in some sort of fashion, but I just kind of look at it slightly different. And this is going to show you visibly how diversity, inclusion, and equity play out in the role of a business. So with that, you all have seen this, I'm sure, before. And I'd ask you to think about the organizational objective. Let's just say this is Cleveland State. Cleveland State's organizational objective in this case is that everybody sees the field and can they can see the field. And in this case, what you see is that one of these individuals can't see the field. So do we have diversity? Yes, we do have diversity. Just looking at the clothing, the height, the weight, the width, the hair, we don't know the gender, but we have diversity. So from this perspective, if we're trying to leverage diversity for our organizational objective, we haven't done a good job. We have it, but everyone can't see the field. So in picture number 2, what we have is we're now going to talk about, okay, well, let's add inclusion because we haven't had inclusion in the first picture. So what do we have to do to create an environment where everybody can see the field, which is the organizational objective? In this case, all 3 individuals can see the field. However, here's what's flawed in this particular situation. And here's often what is flawed in organizations that roll out a diversity program. And one, they call it a program versus just operationalizing it, making it part of the organization's fabric. But in this case, what we have done is taken from one individual to give to someone else that was in need to achieve the objective. So we have diversity, we have inclusion, but I guarantee you in this case, you don't have actual harmony or happiness because the taller statured person isn't feeling like, it's like, why did you take from me? And the shorter statured person, and I will share this as a man of color, if this is me and I'm feeling like, wow, I'm being oppressed or I'm being isolated, I'm being excluded, I don't want you to call out that dimension of diversity that has created this exclusionary behavior. And in this case, the shorter statured person, it's like, hey, let's give them another crate, which makes them feel just more aware of perhaps what their difference was that created the situation to begin with. So when we talk about equity, and many of you have heard this term around systemic racism, systemic sexism, systemic homophobiaism, here's what this says. The organizational objective is for everyone to see the game. The problem was the fence. The problem was the system. It wasn't the people. So in this case, have we achieved our objective of diversity, inclusion, and equity based on how I shared our definition? Yes, we have. Everybody can stand on their own 2 feet. Everybody can bring their uniquenesses to the organization, and everybody has the same opportunity to participate in the objectives and the strategies of the organization. We spend too much time in this work talking about the people. What do we do for the people? What are we going to do to change the people? It's like, no, take a look at the systems. Take a look at the systems. Let them be compensation systems. Let it be our hiring systems, recruiting systems, feedback systems. All of those are the things that drive an organization to demonstrate inclusionary behaviors. So with that, we now level set. Let's move into quarter number 2. And I want to just talk a little bit about why this is important. Oftentimes when I ask the question, is this important? I get the answer, well, of course, Kevin, it's the right thing to do. And people are sharing that to me from more of a social justice standpoint, not necessarily an organizational standpoint. So unless your organization is one that is built around social harmony and fairness and equality, and that's what the objective is, then of course, DE&I, it's the right thing to do, but it's the right thing to do because it allows you to achieve your organizational objective. Let me just share a story with you. And this is actually me in this picture. This was taken in Cleveland. Many of you may not know who the gentleman is with the white shirt on. His name is Mr. Whipple. He was a spokesperson for Charmin Bathroom Tissue. So this was early in my career at P&G. P&G, world recognized brands, having the number 1 brands, number 2 brands in most of the categories they compete in. So I'm sharing this picture because a white male taught me about diversity. And they taught me about it from the standpoint of, he gave me an aha moment that has grounded my work for really the last 3 or 4 decades. So I was coming back from a meeting in Cincinnati where our CEO had called everybody together to talk about launching this strategy around diversity. And there were some other things that we were going to launch. And we were launching this strategy because a number of companies from Southeast Asia were buying up US companies. So, and you had Chinese companies buying up US companies, Japanese companies, Taiwanese companies. And this was back kind of in the 80s. Chiquita Company, which sits right across the street from P&G's world headquarters, was bought by one of these companies. And if you think about their culture, and if you think about just from looking at them as from a dimensional diversity standpoint, they were typically one-dimensional. They were males. They represented their culture, obviously, either Chinese males, Taiwanese males, or Japanese males. There was no cultural diversity within their organizations or within their culture in business. We, as American business, we had lots of different dimensions of diversity. So I go to this meeting, and I'm going there with one of my counterparts, and his name is Mike. I will never forget this. And Mike says to me, as we go into this meeting, he was like, wow, I really don't know why we're doing this. And I'm like, hey, let's just go in and let's just understand what diversity is. Our CEO, John Pepper, who's an amazing speaker, he energized everybody. He talked about how we were going to open up our markets to more people. We're going to bring more people in that look different, walk different, talk different. And as I'm coming out, I was on I was walking on air because I'm like, yes, we're finally going to bring more people into the organization that look like me. We're finally going to bring more people in that represent multiple communities. My friend Mike was not excited at all. So my first reaction and my bias to him was, wow, he must be sexist. He must be racist. Why? How could he not be excited about this? But I didn't let my bias drive my behavior. I asked him, Mike, why aren't you excited? He says to me, and here's the lesson that I learned. He said, Kevin, if this thing diversity is about diversity for the sake of diversity, we're just bringing in people just because, I have too many other things to do, and I don't know how that's going to help me. However, if this is diversity and you can tell me how I'm going to sell more Tide, more Charmin, more Pampers, more Loves, I'm all in. And his body language was different. Here was the aha for me. I had to answer for Mike the WIFM question. And WIFM is an acronym for what's in it for me. Because Mike didn't see what was in it for him. And I will tell you that was back in the 80s. Here we are some, 40 years later, whatever it might be. And we're still having the conversation because white males feel as though we are taking from them, just like was in that picture, to give to everyone else. And they're like, what's in it for me? So that's why our definition and all the work that we do is around the organizational objectives. It's not about one group of people. And I'm going to share with you what that is. So my bottom line out of this was I have to always talk about what's in it for everybody, not what is in it for any one individual group. To the point where in early, I guess it was 2009 or so, I actually wrote this article. And I was living in Atlanta, and it talks about diversity in the bottom line. You notice there is no equity, there's no inclusion, because at that point it wasn't. These are relatively new terms. But what I talk about is the business imperative, whether or not this is compliance or is this really part of business. So what were our 3 key points? I talk about the business motive, and I want to share with you how this plays out for the Cavs. So there's the business motive, the business imperative, and the business case, all 3 different things. Our motive for wanting to be the best of the best in the arena of DE&I is that we will have a vision to be the premier global sports and entertainment company. Here's an example of the business case. It's not the only one, it's one. 52% of our fan base are women or female. 90% of our players are African-American or outside the US, yet both are underdeveloped if you look at kind of from an apparel standpoint, if you look at from an engagement standpoint, if you look at it from just a development standpoint of revenue opportunities, they're all underdeveloped. So the business case is if we can capitalize on these numbers and drive our penetration further with these groups of people, it's going to help the business. And here's our imperative. The sports and entertainment industry is highly competitive, and every current and potential fan is highly valued. Let me speak that in a language that perhaps would be consistent from an academic standpoint for CSU. And this, again, it's a high level just example of translating it from what we do in sports. CSU, your vision is to be a premier higher education learning institution. That may not be exactly the words you would use, but you'll get this for the sake of this conversation. Right now, 52% of the population, the US population, are women and females. 60% of the population under 18 are people of color. Your next generation of students is not going to look like your current generation. So therefore, there is a business case because your imperative is that also higher education is very competitive, and attracting the brightest mind is key to success to your university or college. You need that for your professors, you need that for your students. Diversity of thought is really what higher education institutions actually are about. So you can build into this why it would make sense. And again, I'm using CSU as an example, and I know there's others from across the community that are listening. So yes, DEI is the right thing to do. If there's a such thing as doing diversity, whatever that means. But it's because it's essential to the mission, if it's a nonprofit organization, or revenue. And I know with some of my academic friends, when I talk about the business case in colleges and universities, I've had them as clients, and they're like, Kevin, no, we're not a business. Well, if there's no money, it's going to be hard for us to actually run a academic institution. So let me move into the third quarter, and I'm now going to get into strategy. And within the next 5 to 7 minutes, we're going to land the plane. So our strategic game plan was born out of what I call kind of DEI analytics. When I came on board 4 years ago, I spent the first 90 to 120 data. What are the behaviors? What are the perceptions? What are the attitudes? I talked to fans, I talked to community leaders, I talked to our team members, I talked to our ownership group, I talked to everybody I could. We had surveys, we had focus groups, interviews, and here are 5 areas that came out of this. And I'm sharing this with you because this is nothing different than what, when I was at P&G, we would do when we were rolling out a new color of bathroom tissue or a new fragrance of Tide. We would gather data first. One thing we identified is that we needed more representation of our team members to reflect the communities in which we serve. Another theme came from an environment and culture that we weren't necessarily as inclusive and respectful as maybe we could be. The marketplace. We weren't leveraging DE&I to drive revenue in the communities that we were serving. In some cases, we weren't as relevant as we thought. And lastly, when we talk about fan development, that some of our fans didn't feel that they were inclusive or they were included in our overarching strategies and presentation of entertainment and sports. So what does that look like? This is our strategic framework. And please know under each one of these aspirations, we have tactics, strategies, metrics, accountability, everything that you would have in any other strategy. So if you start on the right-hand side, which talks about culture, our aspiration is that we have an inclusive culture in which everyone is treated with dignity and respect. That everyone not only means our team members, our fans, our vendors, our properties. If you work for the Monsters, you get treated with the same level of respect as though you work with the Cavaliers. When we talk about fan development, having an equitable experience for all of our fans. It doesn't matter if you're in Loudville in our building or if you got feet on the hardwood, your experience should be commensurate with what you invested in coming into our building. Nothing less than that. You should feel great when you leave, no matter who you are. From a marketplace standpoint, we want to leverage diversity and inclusion to increase revenue, create and strengthen partnerships, our community engagement. We want to be relevant, trusted, and engaged with all communities. And I'll tell you why that's important. When I talked to community leaders, and there were a couple communities that actually gave me some specific information, and I want to give you this as an example. The information they gave me was when I asked them again, I'm coming back to Cleveland. I had lived here, moved away for that 30-year period of time. And I asked, hey, what do you think about the Cavs? What do you think about the Guardians? What do you think about the Browns? And the feedback was, hey, you know, the Cavs are great. And I'm like, why are we great? And this one group said, anytime we need something, if it's courts, if it's basketball, jerseys, if it's a grant, you all are always there for us. I said, okay, so what if we didn't do that? And this one group said, Kevin, honestly, if you don't do that, why would we need you? Here's my point. If the 35 of you on this call, every time you saw somebody, you gave them money, you gave them gifts, they would probably think you were great too. So my point was, what if we didn't give you that? Then how would you think of us? We have to be more relevant than a transactional relationship. And I'm going to share with you in a moment what that looked like. And then our team members, we want to make sure our team members at all levels mirror the demographics of the communities that we live and work in. Our complete strategies and plans and tactics, activities are all built on this platform. We also have a focus on supplier diversity, which means that we want to be able to share in the financial benefits of what we do. It's not just from counting who's around the table, not just with our fans, but we have opportunities that we can help small businesses, large businesses that represent these same communities actually benefit from our being here as well. So with any plan, you have metrics. And if those metrics are not tied back to compensation or performance development, typically in organizations, they don't get done or they're not priorities. We rolled out a diversity scorecard, a DE&I scorecard in 21-22. We're in the middle of our second year. First sports team to ever do this. Actually, one of the first organizations across the globe that does this, where you tie the work of DE&I to compensation. So what I'm going to share with you, all of our bonus eligible team members, from our CEO all the way down, have these metrics in their particular compensation plan. So year one, our objective from a training and education standpoint, and we developed a curriculum. And we developed a curriculum because we know that there are different training needs and we didn't want it to be just one time in and one time out. 92% of our full-time team members complete our training, our DE&I training. We had 93%. Supplier diversity, I told you we began to focus on that. We started with 5% of having diverse vendors. We finished at 13%. Representation. We knew, going back to the data from the DE&I analytics, that we did not match the representation of our communities. So we have to escalate that. So our objective was 60% of hires are women and or people of color. We achieved 70%. Community, 5 unique DE&I community activations was the objective. We had 9. And these activations aren't just us giving things away, which historically had been kind of the perception. These were partnering with community groups and helping them in activating in ways that elevated that community with our brand. Marketplace, our objective was 5 DE&I marketplace initiatives that drove incremental revenue. We had 7 that drove $400,000 of incremental revenue. So now the DE&I work we do is a profit center. It's not just an expense. Let me go into the fourth quarter and talk for the love for the land. George Floyd is murdered in May of 2020. The world turns upside down. The question is whether or not is this a moment in time or just a movement? Or is it said differently, is this a movement or just a moment in time? Corporations wrote a lot of checks. They invested in Black communities. A lot of Black folks were hired. Jobs were given. Everybody was talking about how can we support the Black community. For us, the question became, now what for us? We had already had a DE&I group in place, a team, my team, and what we wanted to do was to do more. And what used to be known as the LeBron Wall on the Sherwin-Williams building, we turned that into our mantra for what we think about this community and how we want to support this community for the love for the land. Want to just share with you a very quick video that talks about how it evolved.
We are Cleveland, ode to our unique heritage. From Asia Town to La Vieja España to EC 216, an umbrella of our communities. We let ourselves feel free in this city. People literally got free in this city. Code-named Hope on the Underground Railroad. We got history. City wept when Huff erupted. Flashed a big smile when Fat Al told how he came down in a box Chevy with the door swinging. And we still ain't forget when the shot clock hit 0. And we were a city of champions again. This is Cleveland. We let the memories of home paint a grin on the canvas of our hearts. We let our hearts tell us who to love. Don't let nobody tell us we can't. Aunt Rita takes me to my first pride and my feet dance in the key of deliverance. This my earliest memory of feeling home in my own body. Every memory ain't rosy. City's shown me just how blind justice can be, because we have so many ghosts here. But we make sure to keep living in their honor. Make sure to live for the seeds of tomorrow and leave them a better world. 'Cause love ain't reserved for perfect. You love the things you are willing to make better. We are willing to make better, because home isn't just where I live. It's what lives inside of me. For the love, for the land.
Okay, so it wasn't only us. We then partnered with the Browns and the Guardians to bring them along, and our partnership was, what can we do collectively to exponentially move this whole conversation around DE&I, social justice, community impact? And we created the 3-Team Alliance, and for the last 2.5 to 3 years, we have been meeting every week or every other week to focus on law enforcement, education, voting, and civic engagement. This is what being relevant means. It's not just what we can give, it's what can we do in leveraging our brands. So let me move into overtime quickly, and I'm about to land the plane. So back when George Floyd was murdered, the NBA was really clear that we wanted to support the Black community because they were under siege. And I just want to share with you, because we got a lot of flack around, why would you put Black Lives Matter on the court? If you look at this visual and think about this house as humanity, this is Northeast Ohio. And the person who was talking to the fire officer down on the street is saying, hey, there's a fire in the 2nd floor bedroom. I'm the one who called 911 to say there's a fire. So the resources come to this house, and I think you want them to take the resources to the 2nd floor master bedroom. You don't want them going over to spray water on the garage or in the back of the house. So here's what this means. All lives do matter. However, from a humanity standpoint, given that we all work together, that if there's a fire in any of the rooms that represents any dimension of diversity of humanity, that's where we need to take the resources and put the fire out, and then rebuild what was burned. Otherwise, if we don't put that fire out and we take resources to the garage or the basement or someplace else, the entire house burns down, and eventually the neighborhood of humanity burns down. So it was important for us to know what our why was. And then when my position was created, we were clear on our why. We stand against social injustice. Discrimination is a core value of our organization and is a major part of our DNA. I want to end with this very brief video of when you find your why in doing this work, you exponentially can do better and it makes more sense. So with that, This
is called How Do I Know? And a lot of times when people hear the phrase, how do I know? The next thing they say is what? How do I know what? But the key really isn't to know what. The key is to know why. Because when you know your why, you have options on what your what can be. For instance, my why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. My what is stand-up comedy. My what is writing books. My what can be going out with some friends to eat. In fact, another what that has moved me towards my why is a web series that we have out now called Break Time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you should subscribe to the channel. We do a series called Break Time on YouTube. So 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode. One episode in particular, I'm about to show you a clip to. We were in Winston-Salem. So Break Time, this is how it works. I travel the country, I do stand-up comedy, probably an hour, hour and a half at an event. And in the middle of my show, I'll just sit down and start talking to the audience. And funny just happens. Or I'll meet somebody who's really interesting. So I met this one guy, and he said that he teaches music at a school. I was like, all right, you teach music, you know, can you sing? And then I'm just gonna show you the clip. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing. You know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Right now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
So here's the thing. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time I asked him to sing, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
So Jim, with that, I just want to leave our audience with, when you know your why in doing this work, it is sustainable over a period of time because you're building into the why and the impact. It has to be something beyond, oh, it's just the right thing to do, because that's not sustainable. So thank you for the time, and Jim, it's all yours.
Thank you. And now I know why you didn't want to show me that video today, but that was strong. That was very strong. So thank you. So Kevin, we're going to allow people to go into the chat, but I got some questions that been laying around my head. The one thing that I want to address, I pulled from a Harvard business study, and it's turnover. I mean, turnover, if people put some metrics on what it costs and what you lose when you lose a good employee, and then you got to bring a new person in, you got to train them, get them up to speed. So when you're looking at scorecards and everything else and the work you've done, talk to us a little bit about, the plus side, but the negative side is turnover, right?
Yeah, so Jim, thank you for asking that, because you saw the scorecard and you saw our numbers from a hiring standpoint. And our challenge, though, was we were bringing lots of people in. Now, understand right now in American business, and I say that generically, just in America, period, as we have gone through the pandemic, we have seen a lot of turnover based off of, we have a generation of folks that are like, look, I can now work from home, that was actually accentuated out of the pandemic. And we've seen American organizations now are being challenged by being able to keep people when the requirement is you have to come into an office or come into a building. The turnover as it relates to DE&I, though, is organizations often can go hire people. I can give anybody a job and pay them, but if I don't do something within the culture that allows them, as you saw in the picture, to stand on their own 2 feet, to be valued, to feel that they can contribute, they're going to leave. Or worse than that, they're going to stay. And so what we focus on now, our next scorecard moving in the next year is going to have a turnover metric, specifically around everybody. The base is going to be a common denominator of what is kind of the sustainable turnover, but then how do we reduce the turnover based on what we're seeing amongst people of color and women.
All right, so we got our first questions coming from Lenroy Jones. And so just looking at the question, I know you inspired him, but how do we take this content, principles, and process to the divide in community in our country? So what he's talking about here is, you know, how do we move it forward in a bigger way, I guess, you know, and Lenroy, if you want to add some more into that, I hope I did justice to the question.
Yeah, and Jim, you and I have a plan on how we're going to be able to get it out. That I'll wait for the right time to talk that. So thank you for the question. That is why I am so passionate around using the piece of landscape that I have some influence on, and that's professional sports. People get excited about professional sports. It's not, to me, it's not around the fact that we're in the playoffs. To me, it's the longer that our team was in the playoffs, it's the more light shines on our organization to be able to be in the community and to share the message that we're just talking about. Because people get excited around, oh, wow, it's the Cavs, it's the Browns, it's the Guardians. We came together to do good and to use sports as a way to, and sports has always been a unifier of people. It goes back to Nelson Mandela and what he did with rugby in South Africa. It's always been a unifier. So that's the piece that we can control. And that is to go beyond and above what happens on the court. But then how do we leverage that to get the ears and eyes of people to share this message that this is broader than just giving to some and taking from others. It's about humanity. And how do we grow humanity? Because we all win when that happens, not just some of us.
Right. So you talked about some of the initiatives that you came up with that moved the bottom line. The thing that I love about sports and sponsorships is that sometimes a bank, I'll just use a bank as a category, can do a heck of a lot more by teaming up with an NBA team instead of trying to do it on their own. So can you go back to a little more detail on those initiatives that you put together that really moved the bottom line?
Sure. We partnered, so it's not only from a sponsorship standpoint, the other part of that is how do you bring key community influencers into doing this work? So we partnered with the NAACP, which is a civil rights organization in the Black community, historic civil rights organization. And we also then partnered with organizations of our current sponsors, like Airmart, which is our food service vendor, to put on what's called the Taste of Black Cleveland. And what that did, it's every August, and we bring in, and there's a whole submission process where you can submit to be involved. We take 20 of the best restaurants and chefs or catering companies, and we then put on a major community event in our building, Jim, with taking music, arts, fashion, food. We raise money out of that goes back to the NAACP. It also goes back to our foundation that then goes back to the community as we have brought on sponsors. So some of our sponsors that participate on the Cavs side also have sponsored this event that was created for this moment. So it's a focus event for the Black community. We had over 1,000 people paying $150 a ticket to participate. That didn't happen before. So that's just one example. We do that, and that's why you saw there were 9 different community activations that we do that drive revenue. But that was just one example of how we create opportunities and moments for our partners to do more than just put a sign up.
All right, I was really impressed with the scorecard, but take it down to employee reviews. So these people that are achieving you and helping you hit some of these numbers, is DEI a part of your employee evaluations at the end of the year?
Jim, people will think that you actually sent these questions to me ahead of time. That's a perfect question. And here's why. We have what's called a game plan. The game plan is our way, most organizations call them what you just said, performance review. There's a DE&I component in everybody's performance review. So it doesn't matter if it's me at the executive level or if it's a single contributor at a lower level in the organization. It's what is the one thing that you're going to do around DE&I to contribute to the organization's overall scorecard. Some people where they have buying ability, it's going to be around supply diversity. To some people that don't have people management, they're new in the organization, it's going to be, I'm going to participate in our ERGs, which are ours are called team member resource groups. I'm going to participate and support maybe this initiative that is, it could be like Pride Night or Pride Week or whatever. Everybody has a part of this that's connected to their performance review, which we call our game plans.
All right, so this is a question about culture and how you improve things, but let's face it, some leaders in your organization are going to be on the quiet side, okay? So how do you create a culture where you encourage your quiet leaders, and they don't have to be leaders, but people just to speak up if they're a little bit more on the shy or introverted side of the equation, because we know those extroverts are going to come roaring out of the gates and let you know what they think. But how do you get everybody to feel comfortable that they can bring what they want to say, what their inputs are?
Yep. So two parts of that, Jim. First, we accept people where they are. And we know that there are introverts, there's extroverts. And the very first training that we did was around cognitive diversity, which is around thinking styles, knowing that people think differently, because that's the most basic common dimension of diversity. My thinking style. You and I think differently. We have different preferences of how we receive information or not. So part of that is recognizing we have introverts and we have extroverts, and allowing people to bring themselves to the table. What we have done, though, is broken this out in smaller groups. So where we have, here's what the total organization is doing up here, all of our separate teams or departments or functions, they drill down to have smaller team meetings where those people don't feel comfortable speaking up in public or in larger groups. They will have voice, and we also have different ways of doing of like our training and our engagement. We do use from time to time, we'll still use Zoom from a training standpoint. We'll use in-person training. We'll do things where people can just go off on their own and come back and write something. So we try to use different dimensions of training and connectivity so that people don't have to feel like, oh, I'm an introvert, I have to speak up in a group. I don't want to do that. So therefore, I'm going to be perceived as being less than. So no, we try to touch all bases by our ways and methods of how we engage our team members.
Okay, so maybe it's a chance for me to plant a seed here, but you and I are talking about working together for some executive education and some certificates. So more on that to follow. I'm excited about that. But as you see this whole evolution going on in the coming years, what trends or developments are you most excited about?
As we think about the future?
Yes, looking in your crystal ball, what are you excited about looking into the future?
Yep. So I'm excited about the fact that we are able to begin to operationalize this, where people, there's real benefits that will help everybody in an organization. And more of my colleagues that are doing this work, I'm beginning to, I mean, they're beginning to get it as well, that this is around everybody. It's not just one individual group. And it's not just around, hey, we need to go hire 15 people to look different. Boom, diversity is done. We're over. So it's really the evolution of this. And I've always called this technology, because if you use DE&I correctly, you can exponentially grow your organization's objectives, whatever they are. So I'm excited about the evolution of the technology and how it's going to help internally and externally.
Okay, one other quick hitter I put down as I was watching your presentation. A lot of people in this session are going to be scratching their heads saying, 52% female fan base. But I think the bigger picture is fans are not just the people that are going to Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. You got fans that follow you on radio. You got fans that follow you on TV. You got people that consume sports in different ways. Could you go a little deeper on that number?
Yep.
Because I'm guessing that caught some people by surprise.
Yeah, and Jim, when I first saw it 4 years ago, it caught me by surprise. And the Cavalier fan base is higher than that. That's just the NBA fan base. As far as women, I think ours is 54. So here's the point. 97% of our fans never step foot in the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. Think about it. We have 41 home games, 19,000 people. So let's just say it's 20,000 for the sake of easy math. That's 800,000 and 820,000 people. We have literally tens of millions of fans all across the globe. So as we engage with them with apparel, we engage with them with social media, we engage with them in all these other areas, there is data that would suggest that from an apparel standpoint, women buy more apparel than men. From a social media standpoint, women are more engaged in social media. So if you start breaking it down and understanding that the fan base is not, like you said, who is in our building, but it's all the peripheral places of touch points, you could get to that number pretty easily.
Okay, we got a new question in, and it's all about HR. By the way, you guys got a great HR department over there, and I've got some ties to that group. But here's the question. Does HR have control over hiring a diverse individual or the hiring manager of the department? So, interesting question.
Yep. So what we have done, everybody has bought into what our objectives are and our strategies. The hiring leader is 100% responsible for who they hire, not HR.
Okay, cool. All right, so we got, I don't know, a minute left. What question didn't I ask you that you wish I would have?
Well, the one question to me would be kind of you kind of got to it, but kind of what can our listeners do to continue to move this DE&I movement forward? And the reason I say that is because the work of DE&I is under attack. There is legislation out there that calls out DE&I that cannot be taught, cannot be instituted. We have to stand up for this work, but we also have to understand what it is and what it's not. If it's just hiring people and taking from one group to give to another, no, that is not right. But if we are talking about creating a landscape where everybody can bring their uniquenesses to the table, that benefits everybody. So I would just ask you, where you see attacks against this work, stand up for the rightness of making sure that we level the landscape for everybody.
Yeah, and you and Heather and I were talking about some of those moves to take DEI out of the curriculum, but I think you can count, I know you can count on Cleveland State to stand there right with you, and let's go take that on. Come on. All right,
I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
We are at the wrap-up time. I want to thank Kevin for all of his insights and for being with us today, and our audience. This, as Heidi said at the beginning, it was our last Cornerstone Speaker Series for the academic year. So look for more great content coming out of our Cornerstone Speaker Series and topics in the fall. And check out Cleveland State, because some of your friends that couldn't make it today, this whole session today is being recorded, and help us spread the word. I think that's the other way they can help us, Kevin.
Absolutely. I agree. And this has been an honor for me to participate, Jim. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.